Heroin epidemic. It's growing, leaving thousands of addicted and hundreds dead from drug overdoses. Take a look at this. In 26 states, heroin-related deaths and addictions doubled between 2011 and 2012. According to state health departments, medical examiners' offices, and law enforcement agencies across the nation, overdoses and addiction treatment are highest in the states you see here in red. While some states reported few changes, others pointed to heroin as a significant public health concern, and that means we're all on the hook because more of us are paying for the care of heroin addicts with our own tax dollars. With us here, Ed Berliner, to discuss this more with us, as well as our guest here at this hour to talk about this right now. Ed, it's good to see you here.
Good to be back, my friend. Unfortunately, we have to talk about something where the Mexican government just doesn't seem to quite have a full hand on what they're doing in many instances. Okay?
That's right, and it seems difficult for us to counter that as well.
It is. In New York, there is more heroin today than in the past 20 years. Think about that. Now, all New York City police officers will soon carry emergency kits to deal with heroin overdoses. Now, these kits, specifically speaking, contain 2 syringes and 2 inhalers of an antidote called Narcan or naloxone. After being administered, it removes the drug molecules from the brainstem. The person starts breathing again and wakes up. Suffolk County launched the pilot program in 2012, and 563 lives were saved. Now, the kits cost about $60 each with a 2-year shelf life, and that, of course, cost is something that everybody wants to talk about.
Yes, the cost, our cost, the cost of the taxpayer. And joining us right now to talk about the spike in heroin addiction and overdose deaths is former DEA agent and Vice President of the National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau, Steve Peterson. Steve, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me with you.
Go ahead.
Now, Steve, I guess the one thing, and I just pointed this out here at the beginning, and I wanted to get your take on this right away, because we're consistently talking about the cartels, we're talking about the drugs that are crossing the border, and what always catches me is it's almost like a tilted windmills sort of dream here, that the Mexican government seems to say that they have a handle on it, or they're able to actually try to get a handle on it. We have people who are switching sides between the cartels, between the militias, between the military, between the government involved themselves. Nobody really seems to know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys still to this day, and this has been going on for a long time. Fair to say?
Oh, very fair to say. The Mexican government has had a very difficult time combating the cartels, as much as the Colombian government had back in the 80s, battling the Medellin and Colombian drug cartels in South America.
Now, New York's very heavily populated, the most populated city in America, North America, at least United States. They have thousands of police officers here. So how much is it going to cost to equip all of them, and where is this money going to come from?
Well, the money's going to come from the taxpayers, and it is expensive. And Narcan's been used for quite a while. It's typically carried in ambulances and so forth. But because of the spike in heroin use and heroin overdoses, you're seeing it become much more popular. In fact, on the street, Narcan is called JC, for Jesus Christ, because it literally brings people back from the dead. That's how effective the drug is. But it does, the price comes right back to the taxpayers, because somebody has to pay for it to be outfitted and into every cruiser, for every cop to have access to it, not just the ambulances.
Now, here come the critics again. I've lived in New York City for a long time, lived in the Northeast for a long time, so I've often heard this, that this type of medication enables the addict and simply doesn't, it just puts a Band-Aid on the problem as far as many people are concerned. What do you think?
Well, that's absolutely correct, because what happens is you revive people who have overdosed. And while saving lives is great, all it does is it enables the addict to get back up and use again. In fact, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And in Charlotte, we have the distinct distinction of having the greatest use of black tar Mexican heroin east of the Mississippi River. We have more black tar Mexican heroin in Charlotte than they have in New York City today. And I can tell you that what heroin addicts do here is routinely overdose. In fact, addicts typically utilize heroin in pairs, so that if one overdoses, the other can perform CPR until EMS can arrive. And because that happens, once they survive their medical event, then sadly the next day they're shooting up, they're back using again. So, you know, you hate to say that, well, death is certainly one way of preventing any type of recidivism for heroin use. By using Narcan and by just helping these guys get over their overdoses, all we are doing is continuing down that path. That does not help anybody get rid of the addiction or deal with the dependence.
And obviously, Stephen, this is a national health concern right now here, of course, and you multiply $60 over and over and over again, you get to a very big number here. But on the other hand, we're dealing with drug addicts here, and some might see this interview and say, hey, it's callous to worry about the tax payers at $60 when you're talking about a human life here, especially those folks who view drug addiction as a disease more so than something else here. But that said, is there a better way than this drug, the Jesus drug as you call it, to more effectively deal with the epidemic of heroin addiction facing people in this country?
Well, addiction is a disease, and it is a disease brought on through bad choice, because while people have addictive personalities and have that gene within them, they actually activate an opiate addiction by the constant use of an opiate. So we have to eliminate that choice and those uses early on. And really what has sparked the heroin use not only is the popularization of heroin by the media, but also by the overflow of prescription drug, specifically prescription pain medication. When you look at cities that are swamped with heroin use, these are cities that just 5-10 years ago were plagued by an overdose of prescription pain medication. And when that prescription pain medication no longer was available, the addicts turned to the next best thing, which is actually heroin. And Mexican black tar heroin is probably the cheapest, yet the most potent form of heroin on the market today.
I covered the prescription pill epidemic pretty extensively in South Florida, where it was really bad. But what are you saying now is we're in worse shape because of the crackdowns in places like Florida and elsewhere on prescription drugs? We're in worse shape now because of heroin.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So would you say those efforts have been a failure for the overall drug policy in the United States, those failures to crack down on prescription pills?
No, because the problem is you have to start cracking down somewhere. The problem is once the prescription pain pills got out of hand, once you saw cities or states like Florida, South Carolina, Kentucky, where they had huge abuses of prescription pain medication, what happens, by that time, we had already developed an addict base. We had already developed people who, or developed a population of people dependent upon an opiate. And then when we cracked down on the use or the abuse and misuse of prescription pain medication, we did nothing to deal with the addiction or the dependent population. They had no choice but to look for alternative sources of their opiates, which in this case was heroin.
Steve,
so it's not a loss. It's basically what it is it's an alternative. It's a normal transition from one drug to another drug.
So let's go back then to the Mexican cartels, where we started all this and where really all this problem starts one way or another. Mexico currently the top American source of heroin. Cartels, as we noted, they're just fueling this drug trade. El Chapo is one of Mexico's biggest drug lords, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Now, he was arrested. But here comes, this may be a question that really has no answer, or we're just going to guess. Many will ask, will this arrest slow down the trafficking of heroin, and who runs the cartel now? Why is it I hear the answer coming back, nothing's going to stop it as far as one man is concerned?
Well, it won't, because if you look at El Chapo, he was arrested in 2001. He was in prison for a number of years before he escaped. Now, he's been on the lam for a number of years when he was recaptured back in February. Whether he's incarcerated or not, it's not going to make any difference. The organization runs like a corporation, and they run as if you take out the CEO, there's always somebody there who's going to replace him fairly quickly. So not any one person is responsible for an organization running. You chop off the head, the entire organism dies. But in the cartel's cases, that is not the case.
There's a lot of concern, Stephen, about the border safety between the United States and Mexico as it relates to this drug issue, but also on the northern border of the United States as well. President Obama recently named a new national monument in New Mexico. It's called the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks, but there's also some concern about national lands on a border with Canada being used for drug activity, whether it's growing marijuana in the Pacific Northwest or trafficking and smuggling heroin through the southern United States. Does this set up the United States government for more problems by having this federal land become monuments where it's not patrolled by law enforcement agencies?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our border protection is really comical. Look at all that we've done to rescue one U.S. Marine who accidentally wandered into Mexican territory with some weapons. We've been fighting to get him released. Yet every day we release thousands of illegal Mexican traffickers who come into this country without any penalties whatsoever. Even convicted felons who should be incarcerated are released. We're the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have any type of border security or enforceable immigration laws. And it's pathetic. It's an absolute joke.
Steve, 15 seconds, a quickie. With the type of administration we have, with the type of things that the Border Patrol is given, with the money that's here, is it simply easy to state that this is an unwinnable war the way it's going right now?
I don't want to say it's unwinnable. Given the rules that we are fighting with today, it's like the Vietnam War on drugs. It's unpopular. We don't have public support. The administration is not supporting us. They want to legalize things. And we're always going to be fighting an uphill battle, but it's a battle that needs to be fought and it needs to be won.
Indeed.
All right, thanks for your input on this, Steve. Great to talk to you. And as we see that, we see what's happening in Colorado with the move to the other direction where they're legalizing marijuana anyway. That's still a social experiment, but a lot of folks saying there needs to be a different way to address the war on drugs, and that was a good question. I'm glad you got that one in there. We want to hear from you as well. What do you think about the epidemic of heroin addiction in the United States right now and the war on drugs overall? Reach out to us on America's Forum at Newsmax TV. The hashtag is America's Forum. We're back with more right after this.